The cruelest lies are the ones spoken by people who never bothered to learn your truth. If you had asked Noah Carter what he thought about Ethan Brooks a month ago, he would have answered without looking up from his phone. Harmless. Forgettable. A man who drifted through life wearing polite smiles and expensive sweaters paid for by someone else. Someone who had never struggled, never earned anything, never mattered. Noah believed that because it was easier than questioning the stories everyone repeated. Ethan always arrived quietly to family dinners, carrying homemade desserts no one remembered to compliment. He refilled empty glasses before anyone noticed. He stayed behind after everyone left, helping clear the table while conversations continued around him as though he were part of the furniture. Somehow, despite being in every room, Ethan had mastered the impossible talent of becoming invisible. Noah never thanked him. He barely acknowledged him. To Noah, Ethan represented everything he disliked. Soft-spoken people made him suspicious. Kindness without obvious ambition looked like weakness. Silence sounded too much like surrender. Noah respected people who fought for attention, who demanded recognition, who entered a room and changed its temperature. Ethan did the opposite. He lowered his voice whenever others raised theirs. He apologized even when someone else bumped into him. He smiled after insults as though he believed peace was always worth more than pride. It irritated Noah more than he cared to admit. "You let people walk all over you," Noah muttered one evening after another tense family gathering. Ethan looked up from stacking empty plates, blinking behind the loose strand of dark hair that had slipped across his forehead. "Maybe they're carrying something heavier than I am," he answered with a small smile. Noah almost laughed. What kind of person actually believed something like that? Outside, the autumn air wrapped around the old estate, carrying the scent of damp leaves across the wide front lawn. Ethan stepped onto the porch holding a cardboard box filled with forgotten decorations. He paused just long enough to watch the neighborhood lights flicker on one by one. For a moment, he looked strangely peaceful, like someone who had learned to expect disappointment without letting it poison his heart. Noah watched from the doorway, annoyed by the quiet ache he couldn't explain. He pushed it away as quickly as it appeared. Compassion complicated things. Judgment was easier. The following weekend, the family gathered again to discuss the future of the Carter Foundation after Noah's grandfather announced his retirement. Lawyers shuffled paperwork across the polished oak table while relatives argued over responsibilities and expectations. Ethan sat near the end, listening more than speaking, his hands folded neatly in his lap. When he finally offered a suggestion about expanding the scholarship program, the room fell silent for half a second before someone changed the subject entirely. Noah didn't even notice the interruption. He noticed only Ethan's expression. There wasn't anger. There wasn't embarrassment. There was simply acceptance, practiced and familiar, like someone closing a book he'd already read too many times. Then Noah leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and spoke the sentence that would haunt every sleepless night that followed. "Honestly," he said with a cold shrug, "you're nothing." Ethan held his gaze for one long heartbeat. Then he smiled gently, nodded once, and whispered, "I hope you never have to find out how wrong you are." The words should have rolled off Ethan's shoulders like every other careless remark he had endured over the years. Instead, they settled somewhere deep, not because they were new, but because they came from the one person whose opinion he had quietly wished would change. The following Monday arrived with pale sunlight spilling across downtown Boston, and life continued with its usual rhythm. Noah buried himself in conference calls, contracts, and impossible deadlines at Carter & Wells. His calendar was packed down to the minute, exactly the way he liked it. Predictable, efficient, controlled. Ethan's days looked nothing like that. Before most people poured their first cup of coffee, he was already at the Carter Foundation office sorting through handwritten scholarship applications that had arrived over the weekend. Most were from students whose dreams depended on one chance, one signature, one person believing in them. Ethan read every page carefully. He highlighted achievements no one else would notice. He made notes in the margins reminding the committee to look beyond grade point averages and see the people behind the numbers. By noon, he was across town meeting with a community center director whose after-school music program had nearly lost its funding. Ethan listened more than he spoke, scribbling ideas into a worn leather notebook that had followed him everywhere for years. Before leaving, he quietly promised he would see what he could do. The director smiled with relief, unaware that Ethan had already decided which personal expenses he could postpone if the foundation board rejected the proposal. None of those moments ever reached Noah. They existed in completely different worlds. At dinner that evening, Noah overheard his aunt complaining about the foundation budget. "Someone keeps recommending projects that barely make financial sense," she sighed while folding her napkin. Noah assumed she meant Ethan and barely looked up from his plate. "He likes emotional decisions," Noah answered. "Someone has to think logically." Across the table, Ethan remained silent, stirring his iced tea with slow circles until the ice cubes stopped clinking. No argument. No defense. Just another quiet acceptance. Later that night, after everyone had left, the estate manager discovered a burst pipe behind the old guest house. Water had soaked several storage rooms containing decades of family records. While most relatives had already driven home, Ethan stayed behind wearing rolled-up sleeves and borrowed rubber boots, carefully moving damp boxes onto dry shelves one by one. Old photographs, handwritten letters, financial ledgers, military medals, and countless pieces of family history passed through his hands with patient care. He did not complain once. Around 10:30, Noah returned after realizing he had forgotten an important folder in the library. Walking through the hallway, he caught a glimpse of movement near the storage building. Through the open doorway, he saw Ethan kneeling beside another stack of boxes, exhausted but still smiling politely as he thanked the maintenance crew for their help. Noah watched for only a second before convincing himself it was nothing special. Anyone could move boxes. Anyone could stay late if they had nothing better to do. He grabbed his folder and left without saying a word. Ethan remained until nearly midnight. Before locking the storage room, he picked up a faded family photograph that had slipped from one of the damaged albums. He gently brushed away the remaining drops of water, smiled at the faces captured decades earlier, and whispered almost to himself, "Some things are worth protecting, even if no one ever knows who saved them." 3 days passed before Noah realized something had changed, although at first it felt too small to deserve his attention. Ethan was still listed on every family email. His name still appeared on the foundation schedule. His office still existed at the end of the second-floor hallway. Yet somehow, he was nowhere to be found. Monday's budget meeting began exactly at 9 o'clock. Noah arrived with his usual black coffee and a stack of neatly organized files. The conference room buzzed with quiet conversations until his aunt glanced toward the empty chair beside the window. "Has anyone heard from Ethan?" she asked casually. Several people exchanged puzzled looks before the executive assistant answered. "He sent over all of his reports yesterday morning. Everything was completed ahead of schedule." Noah frowned almost without thinking. Ethan never missed meetings. He was the kind of person who apologized for arriving 30 seconds late. "Did he say why he is absent?" Noah asked. The assistant shook her head. "Only that the team has everything they need." The meeting continued, but Noah caught himself looking toward the empty chair more than once. It annoyed him. Why should it matter whether Ethan was there? He contributed very little during discussions anyway. At least that was what Noah had always believed. By Wednesday, another strange inconvenience appeared. The coffee machine outside Noah's office had run out of supplies. Normally, someone from the foundation restocked it before anyone noticed. The receptionist frowned while opening the cabinet. "That is odd," she murmured. "Ethan usually checks this every Wednesday morning." Noah blinked. Ethan? The same Ethan everyone described as sheltered and dependent? Since when had he been taking care of office supplies? Later that afternoon, Noah searched for an old scholarship proposal in the foundation database. The file appeared immediately, perfectly organized with color-coded notes, financial projections, donor histories, and follow-up reminders extending almost 5 years into the future. Every document carried the same initials. E.B. Noah leaned back slowly. He had assumed an entire department handled those records. Instead, it seemed one quiet man had been holding the system together without anyone noticing. Thursday brought another surprise. Noah stopped by the community center to review a potential partnership. The director greeted him warmly before asking, "Is Ethan feeling better?" Noah hesitated. "I am sorry." The older man smiled. "He came every month. Sometimes every week when we were struggling. He never wanted recognition. He just said the kids deserved a chance." Noah forced a polite smile, but something cold settled beneath his ribs. "I did not know he visited here." "Really?" The director laughed softly. I figured you two worked closely together. Noah offered a vague excuse before ending the meeting early. On the drive back downtown, the city blurred beyond the windshield. Red lights reflected across the wet pavement, while fragments of conversation repeated inside his head. He came every month. He organized everything. He stayed after everyone left. Noah tightened his grip on the steering wheel. None of it matched the version of Ethan he had carried for years. That evening he walked past Ethan's office again. The lights were off. The small potted fern on the windowsill had begun to lean toward the fading sunlight. A single envelope rested neatly in the center of the desk, addressed only to the foundation staff in Ethan's familiar handwriting. Noah stared through the glass for several long seconds before quietly reaching for the doorknob, only to discover it was locked for the very first time. The envelope remained untouched until Friday morning. Noah told himself he only wanted to understand why Ethan had disappeared without warning, but curiosity felt suspiciously similar to guilt. The office manager unlocked the door with a spare key and quietly stepped aside. "We were waiting for someone from the family," she explained. He left everything perfectly organized. Noah walked inside expecting clutter from a rushed departure. Instead, every folder sat squarely on the shelves. Every pen rested in its holder. Even the desk calendar had been updated through the end of the month with reminders for projects Ethan would never personally attend. It looked less like someone had quit and more like someone had spent weeks making sure nobody else would be inconvenienced. Noah noticed a small cardboard box beside the filing cabinet labeled Archive, Scholarship History. He opened it absent-mindedly, expecting routine paperwork. Instead, he found dozens of handwritten letters from former scholarship recipients, college acceptance announcements, graduation photos, wedding invitations, holiday cards, thank you notes written in careful handwriting from students who had become teachers, engineers, nurses, artists, and business owners. Nearly every letter mentioned Ethan by name. "Thank you for believing in me before anyone else did. You changed my life. I still remember what you told me during my interview." Noah stared at the pages one after another, his heartbeat slowing into something heavy. None of those letters had been displayed in the foundation lobby. None had appeared in annual reports. Ethan had kept every one of them tucked away in a simple storage box, as though the gratitude belonged to the students rather than himself. Beneath the letters rested an aging blue folder with a faded label that read, Emergency Funding Initiative. 8 years ago. Noah recognized the date immediately. That had been the year the Carter Foundation nearly collapsed after a major donor unexpectedly withdrew support. The family had always believed Noah's grandfather managed to rescue the organization through difficult negotiations. Curious now, Noah opened the file. Inside were budget revisions covered in handwritten notes, personal fundraising plans, grant proposals sent overnight, lists of community partners, dozens of rejected applications followed by one successful approval that had ultimately saved the scholarship program from shutting down. Every page carried Ethan's initials. Noah frowned, convinced there had to be a mistake. Ethan would have been barely out of college at the time. Why would he have been handling a financial crisis that even senior executives struggled to solve? At that moment, a familiar voice interrupted the silence. "You finally found that file." Noah turned to see Margaret Ellis standing quietly in the doorway. She had served as the foundation's executive director for nearly 20 years before retiring last spring. She smiled gently, though her eyes carried an unmistakable sadness. "I always wondered when someone would ask who actually kept this place alive." Noah held up the folder. "These documents cannot be right." Margaret walked over, resting one hand on the worn cardboard box. "They are exactly right. Your grandfather received the credit because he was the public face of the foundation. Ethan insisted it stay that way." Noah shook his head. Why would he hide something like this? Margaret looked toward the rain collecting outside the office window before answering softly. Because he believed helping people mattered more than being remembered. The room fell silent. Noah lowered his eyes to the final page inside the folder where a single handwritten sentence appeared beneath Ethan's signature. "If this succeeds, please do not mention my name. Let the students believe hope simply found them when they needed it most." Margaret left Noah alone with the archive, but the silence no longer felt ordinary. It pressed against his chest with every page he turned, every signature he recognized, every date that quietly rewrote the history he thought he knew. For years, he had admired his grandfather for steering the foundation through impossible times. Now he realized someone else had been standing behind the curtain, solving problems before they ever reached the spotlight. Ethan had never corrected the story. He had simply let everyone believe whatever made them comfortable. Noah reached for another folder, this one marked with nothing more than the year. Inside were meeting notes, donor correspondence, and dozens of drafts filled with careful edits in Ethan's handwriting. Each page carried the same pattern. Someone else received the credit. Ethan did the work. He found another document that stopped him cold. It was a recommendation letter addressed to one of the country's most respected nonprofit leadership programs. The committee had offered Ethan a prestigious fellowship nearly 6 years earlier, one that would have taken him across the country and opened doors most professionals only dreamed about. Attached to the acceptance letter was a short reply from Ethan. "Thank you for this extraordinary opportunity. Unfortunately, I must decline. My family foundation needs immediate support, and I cannot leave while students depend on these programs." Noah read the sentence twice, then a third time. He remembered that year perfectly. The family had assumed Ethan simply lacked ambition because he never accepted bigger opportunities. No one had asked whether he had chosen to stay. No one had imagined he had given something up. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Noah looked up to find his grandfather standing in the doorway, leaning lightly on his cane. The older man studied the open files before letting out a slow breath. "I suppose you know now," he said quietly. Noah looked at him with disbelief. "You knew all of this?" His grandfather nodded. "Every bit of it. Then why did you let everyone misunderstand him?" The old man lowered himself carefully into a nearby chair, his expression carrying the weight of many years. "Because Ethan asked me to. He believed people should support the foundation because they believed in its mission, not because of him. Every time I tried to recognize his work, he found a polite way to stop me." Noah rubbed a hand across his face, searching for words that refused to come. "I called him nothing." His grandfather did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the empty desk where Ethan's favorite ceramic mug still rested beside a neatly folded sweater. "Do you know what Ethan asked me the day after you said those words?" Noah slowly shook his head. "He asked me to make sure you never blamed yourself. He said you were only judging the version of him that everyone had allowed you to see." The sentence landed harder than any accusation could have. Noah closed his eyes, remembering Ethan's calm smile, his quiet voice, the way he had nodded instead of arguing. There had never been anger in his eyes, only disappointment wrapped in kindness. Noah suddenly understood why that hurt so much more. As he gathered the folders to return them to the archive, a small photograph slipped from between 2 pages and drifted onto the floor. It showed a much younger Ethan standing beside a group of smiling scholarship students at a community center opening nearly a decade earlier. He was standing in the very back row, almost hidden behind everyone else, smiling exactly the same way he always had, content to let everyone else's happiness fill the frame while he quietly disappeared into the background. By Saturday morning, Noah had visited every place he could think of. Ethan's apartment building manager politely explained that the tenant had checked out 2 days earlier. The neighborhood coffee shop where Ethan always ordered the same vanilla latte had not seen him all week. Even the small bookstore near the public garden, where Ethan spent quiet Sunday afternoons reading by the window, felt strangely empty without the familiar figure turning pages with unhurried patience. Noah had never realized how much of the city quietly belonged to Ethan until every familiar place reminded him of his absence. He kept replaying the last conversation they had shared, searching for some hidden warning that he had missed. There was nothing dramatic. No argument beyond those careless words. No slammed doors. No accusations. Ethan had simply smiled, wished everyone a pleasant evening, and disappeared from Noah's life as gently as he had always entered every room. The realization unsettled him more than anger ever could. That afternoon, Noah found himself standing outside the community center once again. The director welcomed him inside with a warm smile, but his expression softened the moment he noticed Noah standing alone. "You are looking for Ethan, are you not?" Noah nodded. There was no point pretending anymore. "Do you know where he went?" The older man hesitated before answering. "He asked us not to share his location." Noah lowered his eyes. "I understand." The director studied him quietly for a moment before walking toward a bulletin board covered with photographs from past charity events. He pointed to one picture showing Ethan laughing beside a group of children painting colorful murals. "You know," he said softly, "every person who came through these doors believed Ethan was extraordinary. The only person who never seemed convinced was Ethan himself." Noah stared at the photograph. Ethan's smile looked genuine, brighter than Noah had ever seen during family dinners. "Did he ever talk about me?" Noah asked before he could stop himself. The director smiled with surprising kindness. "More than once." Noah's heartbeat quickened. "What did he say?" "He always said you carried too much responsibility for someone your age. He admired how hard you worked." Noah looked away, unable to process the words. Admired? After everything he had said? The director continued. "Whenever people criticized you for being distant, Ethan defended you. He believed you were trying your best, even when you made mistakes." Noah felt something tighten painfully inside his chest. Ethan had protected his reputation, while Noah had quietly destroyed Ethan's. As Noah prepared to leave, the director reached into a desk drawer and removed a small envelope. "He left this with us several months ago in case someone from your family ever came asking questions." Noah accepted it carefully. Inside was a folded card with Ethan's familiar handwriting. There were only 2 short sentences. "Do not waste your time apologizing for the person you used to be. Spend it becoming someone you can be proud of instead." Noah read the message again and again until the words blurred. It was not forgiveness. It was not rejection. Somehow it was both. Gentler and more painful than either. Standing alone beneath the fading afternoon sun, he finally admitted the truth he had avoided for years. He had spent so much time deciding who Ethan was that he had never once stopped to discover who Ethan truly had been. And now, for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Noah realized that finding one quiet man mattered more than winning every case, every meeting, or every argument he had ever fought. The search finally ended on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, almost by accident. Noah had driven 3 hours north to visit one last partner organization listed in the Foundation archives, a small lakeside learning center tucked between rolling hills and towering maple trees. It was the kind of place Ethan would have loved. Children laughed beneath hand-painted signs. Volunteers carried boxes of books instead of briefcases. The air smelled of pine, fresh coffee, and rain that had passed only minutes before. Noah stepped inside with little expectation left. He had learned not to hope too quickly. The receptionist listened patiently before her expression softened. "You just missed the afternoon reading session," she said. "Ethan usually helps every Tuesday." Noah felt his pulse jump. "Usually?" She smiled toward the back garden. "He is still here." Noah turned before she finished speaking. Beyond the wide glass doors, beneath the shade of an old oak tree, Ethan sat on a weathered wooden bench surrounded by a circle of children listening to him read from a picture book. His voice carried softly across the grass, warm enough to make every child lean closer. They laughed together at something on the page, and Ethan laughed with them. His shoulders finally relaxed in a way Noah had never seen before. There was no expensive conference table, no family expectations, no endless responsibilities hanging over him. Just sunlight dancing through green leaves and a quiet happiness that seemed to belong naturally to him. Noah stopped walking. For several long moments, he simply watched. Interrupting felt almost selfish. When the story ended, the children scattered toward the playground, waving goodbye before running off with cheerful voices echoing through the afternoon. Ethan gathered the books into a canvas bag and turned toward the building. That was when he noticed Noah standing near the path. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by the same calm expression Noah remembered from every family dinner. "Hello, Noah," Ethan said gently. "Hello," Noah answered, suddenly forgetting every carefully rehearsed sentence from the drive. Silence stretched comfortably between them while a light breeze stirred the leaves overhead. Ethan finally smiled. "You found me." Noah let out a quiet laugh that sounded more tired than amused. "Apparently, I was the last person who knew where to look." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment before nodding toward the nearby bench. They sat with several feet between them, watching ducks drift across the quiet lake. Neither hurried to speak. For the first time in years, Noah understood why Ethan valued silence. It gave people room to become honest. "I read the files," Noah finally said. Ethan nodded once, as though he had expected that. "Margaret likes to keep good records." "Why did you never tell anyone?" Noah asked quietly. Ethan looked across the water where the late afternoon sun shimmered against the gentle ripples. Because helping people stopped feeling special the moment it became something I wanted credit for. Noah swallowed hard. I was wrong about you. Ethan turned toward him with the same patient eyes that had once accepted every careless remark without retaliation. You were wrong about a version of me that I accidentally helped create, he answered softly. That is different. Noah looked down at his hands, unable to meet Ethan's gaze. He had expected anger. He had prepared himself for resentment. Instead, he was offered understanding he had done nothing to deserve, and somehow that kindness hurt more than any accusation ever could. Noah returned to Boston, carrying something far heavier than the overnight bag in his trunk. It was not regret anymore. Regret looked backward. This was responsibility. 3 days later, the Carter Foundation hosted its annual scholarship gala, an event attended by donors, educators, community leaders, and nearly every member of the Carter family. For years, the evening had followed the same carefully polished script. Speeches praised generous benefactors. Awards celebrated visible accomplishments. The people who worked quietly behind the scenes remained exactly where they always had, behind the scenes. This year, Noah requested one final speaking slot after the closing remarks. His relatives assumed he planned to announce a new fundraising initiative. Instead, as he stepped onto the stage beneath the warm theater lights, he placed a thin blue archive folder on the podium. The ballroom gradually fell silent. Noah looked across the audience before taking a slow breath. Tonight, he began, I was supposed to speak about the future of this foundation. But I cannot talk honestly about our future until I correct our past. Curious whispers drifted through the room. Noah opened the worn folder and held up the first page. For years, I believed success belonged to the people standing in front of cameras. I believed leadership meant being recognized. I was wrong. He spent the next several minutes telling the story exactly as he had discovered it. He described the scholarship programs saved during financial crises, the grant proposals written through sleepless nights, the opportunities quietly declined so the foundation could survive. He read excerpts from letters written by former students whose lives had changed because one person had believed in them before anyone else did. More than once his voice caught, forcing him to pause. There was no dramatic performance. Only truth, spoken later than it should have been. When he finally said Ethan's name, the room became perfectly still. Several board members looked at one another in open disbelief. Others lowered their eyes, remembering conversations they wished they could take back. Noah did not hide behind excuses. I judged someone whose kindness I mistook for weakness, he admitted. I accepted easy assumptions instead of asking honest questions. I spoke words that should never have been spoken. The greatest failure was not that I misunderstood Ethan Brooks. The greatest failure was that I never tried to know him at all. He closed the folder gently before looking toward the front row where his grandfather sat quietly with tears shining in tired eyes. Recognition delayed is still recognition owed, Noah continued. Beginning today, every scholarship recipient will know the name of the man whose work protected their dreams long before they ever submitted an application. The audience rose gradually, almost instinctively. What began as scattered applause became a standing ovation that filled every corner of the ballroom. Noah remained still, unable to accept any part of it for himself. The applause belonged elsewhere. When the evening ended and the guests slowly departed, Noah walked alone through the now quiet lobby. Near the entrance stood a newly installed display prepared earlier that afternoon. At its center hung the same photograph Noah had found in the archive, the one where Ethan stood smiling from the back row, almost hidden behind everyone else. Beneath it rested a simple bronze plaque bearing only a few carefully chosen words. Ethan Brooks. He believed that changing one life was always worth more than protecting his own reputation. Noah stood before it for a long time before quietly whispering into the empty hallway. The truth did not only change what I believed about you. It changed the man I want to become. Winter arrived quietly, painting the city in pale mornings and early sunsets. But for Noah, time was no longer measured by seasons. It was measured by choices. Every week, he visited another scholarship program. Every month, he volunteered without announcing his name. He stopped chasing recognition and started listening before speaking. People noticed the difference, although Noah never asked whether they had. Change, he had learned, was not something you declared. It was something you practiced when nobody was watching. Nearly 4 months passed before he returned to the Lakeside Learning Center. He did not arrive carrying flowers or expensive gifts. He carried 2 paper cups of hot chocolate and a folder containing the Foundation's newest scholarship initiative, renamed in honor of Ethan Brooks. He found Ethan exactly where he expected, helping a group of children build small birdhouses behind the library. Sawdust covered the sleeves of his flannel shirt, and a little girl proudly held up a crooked wooden birdhouse while Ethan applauded as though she had built a castle. When the children finally hurried inside for lunch, Ethan walked over with the same gentle smile Noah remembered. "You came back," Ethan said. Noah handed him one of the warm cups. "I hope that was still allowed." Ethan accepted it with a quiet laugh. Hot chocolate usually is. They wandered slowly along the edge of the frozen lake, their footsteps crunching softly over thin patches of snow. This time the silence felt different. It no longer carried unfinished apologies. It carried patience. Noah finally handed Ethan the folder. Ethan opened it carefully and stopped at the first page. His eyes widened when he saw the new scholarship name. He looked up almost immediately. "You did not have to do this." Noah smiled faintly. "I know. That is exactly why I wanted to." Ethan stared at the pages for another long moment before closing the folder. People will ask questions. Then they deserve honest answers. Ethan lowered his gaze, blinking away emotions he rarely allowed anyone to see. "I never wanted attention." Noah nodded. "I know. This is not about attention. It is about history remembering the right person." They reached the old wooden bench beneath the oak tree where they had spoken months earlier. Noah sat first, then looked toward Ethan with quiet certainty. "I am not here because I expect forgiveness." Ethan remained standing for a moment before sitting beside him. "I know. I am not even here to ask you to forget." Ethan wrapped both hands around the warm cup, letting the steam rise between them. "I know that too." Noah took a slow breath. "I am here because somewhere along the way I stopped looking for the man I hurt and started hoping I could become someone worthy of walking beside him, even if it takes years." Ethan looked toward the frozen lake where a pair of swans drifted peacefully across the narrow strip of open water. A small smile slowly appeared, quiet and genuine. "Then maybe," he said softly, "we should stop talking about the people we used to be." Noah looked at him, surprised. Ethan met his eyes with calm warmth. "There is a coffee shop in town that makes terrible blueberry muffins," he continued. "I have been meaning to find someone willing to suffer through them with me." Noah laughed for the first time in what felt like forever, the sound light enough to disappear into the crisp winter air. "I think I can manage that." They stood together and began walking toward the small town, leaving 2 sets of footprints stretching side by side across the fresh snow, not because the past had been erased, but because both of them had finally chosen the same direction for the road ahead.